Just as a quick notice before we get started, at the time we recorded this episode, our guest's name was Maggie Carroll. Since the recording, he has come out as Luka Carroll, so while we refer to him as Maggie during this episode, it was not dead naming at the time. We were very, very happy that Luka was willing to join us, and we hope that he's able to join us for future episodes. Welcome back to Walking Away from Arcadia. I'm here with my co-host, Simon Eichhornchen, and we are joined today by Maggie Carroll and Charlie Cantrell. We're going to be talking about freeholds and glades and glens and all the special places that changelings go to in their world, what these things are, the place they have in the world. Thank you both for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Happy to be here.
Just to open up, tell us a little bit about Book of Freeholds. It was just released in PDF to C20 backers. Simon and I have been plowing through it. Give the elevator pitch to our listeners.
Well, it always kind of bothered me that freeholds were never defined. I mean, they're a pretty important part of Changeling, so to not have a book about them just kind of struck me as odd. You know, werewolves have cairns, and mages have sanctums and chantries. Changeling didn't have any of that, so the opportunity came up to say, hey, can we do this? And they said yes.
There was the old Freeholds and Hidden Glens book, which Simon and I did look at as a comparison, but it's like a big book of examples. It's a little bit like the Wraith Haunts book.
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between it's no great secret that my first love is Mage. I mean, I love Changeling, but Mage was my game back in the day. I kind of took a lot of notes, especially in the M20, how Phil Broccato organizes things and does things. You know, if you can build a chantry, if it's meant to be Cabal controlled, then a Cabal should know how to build one and where to put points and everything. And you know, a motley is the exact same thing. So it's meant to be a pooled tool for players to expand their characters, their games, to have a say in it, you know?
One of the things that the book draws a division between is a freehold and a glade. Sometimes glades were called glens in the older books. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between those two things and the place they have in Fey life, Fey society?
I'll give you this question.
A glade or a glen, however you prefer to call it, is basically a naturally occurring fountain of glamour, where glamour just sort of bubbles up into the autumn realm from the dreaming. Whereas a freehold is something that's sort of built on top of that to really, at least in my mind, focus the glamour and get it something a little bit more rarefied and a bit more useful for changelings.
Don't want to really say refined. It's just
because
I mean, like the wellspring will produce dross no matter what.
More of a, I guess, in my mind, it acts as kind of a lens for glamour. It brings it a bit more into focus.
That is a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
No, because that's exactly like Steffi had this section. Steffi is the one who wrote all the, you know, she did an amazing job on differentiating mechanically the different kinds of freeholds. And I mean, like, she just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of what you're getting at, right? It's like, it's a way of, you know, you take this hollow, which is a glade in a, if I remember what I wrote, it's a glade like in the middle of a forest. It's like a forest meadow. You turn that into a homestead, and it focuses the glamour around producing chimerical goods, like chimerical crops, chimerical animals.
One of the things that was introduced in the new Freeholds book is sort of the elements of a changeling sanctuary, whether it's a freehold or a glen, and they're fairly compatible between the two types, between freeholds and glens. But it seems like kind of tacking on to what Charlie just said about the freehold being a lens, the main difference between what you can do with a freehold and what you can do with a glen is freeholds and glens have specific types of what are called archetypes that they can invoke that create mechanical benefits to the people using them, and they're different benefits. Could you talk a little bit about the sort of design goal that the archetype aspect thing tries to meet?
The dreaming is archetypes. I mean, it's the most primal element of a story. That is what changelings are. The dreaming is. They're fairy tales, they're stories, they're myths and legends. So the dreaming, one of the big things is like quests and knighthood and structure and all that kind of thing. But those are all archetypes too. So it's really just slotting in freeholds and glens in a way that's very easy to understand and also very thematically linked to the whole archetypical design of changeling.
It's archetypes all the way down.
but I mean, it is like everything, like your kit, your house, they're all archetypes. This isn't the way that changelings used to be. I mean, if you look, well, Charlie's underbridge, beautifully done, by the way. I made him write that.
Thank you.
He turned in his drafts, and I saw underbridge, and I'm like, Charlie, stat this up. It's going in the back. Archetypes are a very recent thing, just like everything else in Changeling. It's how the dreaming has evolved. Underbridge was not a Thorpe, or did we even do up? No, we didn't do up a glen that's for like shadows. Like it had, if it had an archetype at all, it was way different.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like the way that freeholds and glens have evolved as well. Like what's a glen was probably very, very different if it existed before the Shattering.
Underbridge, I remember making an appearance in the Dark Ages Fae book. So how much did you specifically try to make concrete connections, or were you just looking for kind of a narrative link? Just as feedback from when I was reading it, I felt like the Freeholds book actually got in more punch on Dark Ages Fae, especially for its limited word count, than a lot of C20. I mean, there was some definite Dark Ages Fae link there, but I felt like it was pretty beefed up in Book of Freeholds. How intentional was that?
Charlie?
I was going to say that Underbridge was me. That wasn't in the outline. That was just something that I thought would be a fun sort of nod to fans of Dark Ages Fae. Personally, the way I kind of see the connections between Dark Ages Fae and Changeling the Dreaming is that Dark Ages Fae is kind of the prehistory of Changeling before the Shattering, but what's in the Dark Ages Fae book itself isn't quite the whole story. It ends up being a lot more thematically linked than actual textually linked, I guess you could say. But at the same time, you know, this is the stuff that happened.
I mean, at the same time, too, I think a lot of us on Changeling in general, all those of us who are on the C20 book, Charlie and I included, you know, we took inspiration, we took notes where we could. Like, I took one of the banal treasures, the Friar's Cross, directly out of Darkening Skies.
Yep.
And adjusted it for Changeling. So, and I know that, I think Krister had the history.
Yeah.
I know he drew really heavily on DA Fae for that.
He did.
So,
in fact, he was sending me early drafts of some of the stuff he was writing.
Too.
And it was fun seeing how his sort of evolved. But in some of his drafts, there were the connections between Changeling and Dark Ages Fae were a lot more explicit than what ended up being in C20.
So I mean, I can't really speak for anybody that I don't have direct hand knowledge of, but we were pretty much given carte blanche to take inspiration from wherever. Yep. And I didn't see any problem with letting Charlie and Steffi run wild with what they wanted to. And Charlie ended up doing as you just said.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I enjoyed Dark Ages Fae a whole lot, so I like the little connections. At least in my mind, I don't think anything will ever get more explicit than what's in Book of Freeholds, but you know, it's there if you want to use it, and if you don't want to use it, it's easily ignorable. So.
Mercy watched the azure dragon coil against the wall, plaster falling down in chunks where the creature broke through. She could feel the glamour in the beast, calling to her from the dreaming. Her reverie broke abruptly as Lance called from the office backstage. "Merce! Group meeting!" The Eshu sighed and put her brush down, taking one last look at the mural. It was perfect. She found her motley already gathered and waiting for her. In her defense, Laisha and Delilah looked like they'd been here smooching. That did not count as arriving on time. "More bills?" she asked Lance, hoping it was a minor problem. She was keen to return to her dragon. The she shook his head while he opened a manila folder, prompting an eye roll from Kane, who seemed to oppose preparation on principle. "I can handle bills. I found a disturbing pattern." "These people all visited Mirror Lights," Lance continued, spreading out newspaper clippings. The headlines dealt with the victims of stalkings and mortals attacking others. One of them reported a suspicious suicide. "I don't know what's causing their madness, but we have to figure it out. We could lose Mirror Lights. Lady Azrael is already needling the Baron about our lack of experience." "Maybe someone snuck in," Laisha offered, "to taint Mirror Lights somehow." Lance shook his head. The chimerical golems would have stopped any intruders. "It was already here," Kane said, and Mercy sat up with a budding unease gnawing at her innards. "I have nightmares," the redcap continued, "about a darkness in the basement," Laisha finished. Anxiety rose in the pit of Mercy's stomach, spreading hot to constrict her throat. She looked past the office door, back to her magnificent dragon, its scales gleaming with all the love and hope Mercy put into it. Her vision narrowed, and she saw the subconscious details she'd added. Thick strands of darkness at the edges of the mural, encroaching inward to devour the dragon. She looked at Lance, hoping he'd dismiss the theory, but she saw the mounting panic on his face and knew he couldn't. It was already here, unseen, quietly spreading, like poison. Mirror Lights was besieged from inside. "No," she stood up. "This is our home, our haven. Whatever is down there can't win." Kane snorted. "It's already past our defenses. Mirror Lights didn't stop it, didn't warn us. Whatever's down there owns this freehold as much as we do." Mercy looked at Kane, still sitting on the faded blue couch. He was their fighter. How could they hope to win without him? The world spun around her. She was going to fall, or vomit, or... "Fuck you, Kane!" Laisha shot back, rising to stand beside Mercy. "You're supposed to be a big, bad bulldog. We're gonna get down there, and we're gonna beat this thing." Lance stood. Cautious, play it safe, look at all the angles Lance. Noble Lance, whose vote broke motley standoffs. "Grab your baseball bat," he said firmly to Kane. "We're hunting nightmares. Mirror Lights has always had our backs. Tonight, we have hers."
Breaking down a little bit the stuff that makes up freeholds and glades, you broke down the background trait into more or less a system where you can point by different aspects of what you want your freehold to be like as a way to customize it, to give it personality. And while probably everybody agrees that the squishier parts of it are the parts where the soul really is going to be, going through the system a little bit, since it's new, wouldn't be amiss.
Balefire and Wellspring are the exact same thing mechanically. Like I said, I took a lot of notes from Mage and Werewolf in how they build cairns and chantries. The Balefire or Wellspring rating is literally how powerful the Wellspring or balefire is. It is the limiter to a lot of things. Like, you cannot have passages over your balefire rating.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly. So that would mean, like, you could have a balefire of 1 that supports like 5 different trods. It's not likely to happen just because of the nature of it, you know? So we're not saying like it's not a rule that can't be broken. It's just like the guideline is that the balefire is going to be limiting how stronger the other parts can be. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I'm just looking at the book because it's in front of me.
Oh no, this is one part where it's like, because the fun thing of being a writer, especially on something this loved by fans, is occasionally you'll get people that are arguing your own rules back to you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the balefire.
So, but this is one part where I'm just like, no, just tell me if I'm wrong.
It looks like, unless it's somewhere else, but under the balefire entry in the point buy system, it looks like the balefire just limits glamour and dross generation. It doesn't do anything else unless I'm having a massive, like...
It also might have been changed. Like,
yeah.
It also might have been edited. But, like, generally speaking, the spirit of it is like, the balefire is going to be the heart of things. And
yeah, actually, there's an aside right above the balefire thing that says players can skip adding points to balefire entirely.
Yeah, I'm remembering this now. Yes, because they're like, yeah, you can have this gigantic, powerful balefire and like nothing to protect it.
Yeah, and when I read it, the feeling that I got is the out of the book rules are you buy a level and that's how much glamour you get.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that actually very quickly gets out of hand. You know, if lots of people want to have holding for story reasons, you end up, depending on how your game is going, potentially with more glamour than you need. At least I've run into that in my game. My game ended up being lower glamour than I expected it to be just because of the way my players are choosing to engage. And it felt like you get so many points to build your holding, and then you can spend them on whatever you want, and balefire is one of those things. So
yes,
you wanted to build a completely different sort of holding, and you had just invested all of that glamour in running all these other things. It's not that there isn't glamour there. The glamour is just doing everything else. You don't get to spend it yourself. That's kind of the way I read it.
One of the differences is that Glades will produce glamour naturally. Every Glade does it. Freeholds don't. You actually have to take a power to transfer unused glamour into dross. And Glades just get it automatically. Which is kind of like, you know, the balancing of that out. What good is having a Glade? You could turn it into a freehold. Well, we didn't want to do that.
Yeah, well, there's one other thing that I've been thinking about that comment kind of makes me want to jump in on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this wording was intentional or not, but in the section that deals with Bedlam, juicy, freehold-induced Bedlam, it does just use the term freehold. And the language in there that I thought was interesting is it talks about the refined glamour of a freehold and how that's part of the problem. It's just too intense and focused. I'm maybe reading into that word a little bit, but it does refer to freeholds and not glens.
Well, if you go back to Charlie's,
I was going to say that was my section.
Okay,
but if you want to go back to his lens metaphor, I mean, you can start a fire just with sunlight through a lens. So you focus it too hard, you spend too much time in that beam, and you're gonna catch on fire, dude.
I guess, was that distinction intentional? The freeholds induce Bedlam.
When I was writing it, it was not intentional. But now that you pointed it out, I kind of like it. It's pretty cool.
Listen. The golden rule of GMs that your players will always come up with cooler shit than you could.
That's true.
It applies to writers too. Oh no, that was totally intentional.
Totally, yes, you read my mind.
You're failing to cultivate the mystique of the writer. So the other things that were introduced as resources you could buy for freeholds and glades were material resources. Well, I guess it's not really material, but resources that
Well, they could be material. It depends.
They could be, but
you could actually. No, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So resources that are generated, the Trod connection, and then its ability to shelter itself. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how you see all of these things playing together to like make different freeholds of different character.
One of my favorites, I actually had a ball writing it, were the Niflhel Barons, the Glades. It has a resources rating, say, right? Charlie can pick one to contrast with it, whatever one he wants. But like, if you look at Niflhel Barons, its sanctuary is the remoteness of the location. It's the people from the Trolls Borgs. It's the fact that it's basically inhospitable most of the year. It doesn't have much resources, but the stuff it does have is chimerical quality of leather and boar tusks. So you compare that with something else. It paints a picture of this isolated place where the hardy can go to survive, where in that area the lords, the nobles, would hold hunts to get these beautiful leather armors made from the boar skins. That all plays into what it is at its core, which is, Nordic barren land of icy hell. Charlie, want to pick something to compare it with?
I was actually going to compare it to the Geomantic Heart because
there you go. That one was yours.
Yeah, that one was mine, and I enjoyed doing that one. And it exists as kind of a sanctuary for the Crystal Circle. It's this incredibly powerful freehold, but it was built to be as inaccessible as possible. It's got the maxed out sanctuary rating and everything, and it's literally in the heart of a mountain in France, and so you cannot just physically walk to it. You have to have some arts and realms in order to even enter it. So as opposed to just using natural geography to make it so inhospitable, it's very magically inaccessible.
I don't think it had any resources, did it?
No, it didn't have any resources. It didn't really have any passages. It just had a raft to get in and out of it.
Yeah.
Because it was the Crystal Circle's sort of repository of all their knowledge. So they don't want that stuff leaking out and getting into the wrong hands. So even though it's this incredibly powerful freehold, it doesn't do a lot other than it keeps these secrets safe.
We've talked a lot about kind of high fairy tale mythic kind of freeholds. There are a couple freeholds that are mentioned in the book. One that I actually live like 2 train stops from, which I discovered maybe 3 train stops from, which is cool. The American Indian Center in Chicago. And it's more like a concrete physical place. And it also kind of introduced a Nunyahi freehold, not in the context of like the lodges, which was the terminology that was used in C20. Can you talk a little bit about picking that spot, including the story you were trying to frame with setting that freehold there? It seems much more urban than a lot of the others that I've seen, which I like. That inclusion was really awesome. I looked them up, and it got a lot of story ideas going for me. So I'm curious about what went into that.
So that's actually good to hear. What I wanted was something very archetypical of surviving against impossible odds. And the Nunnahi really sprang to mind there. And it just seems like throughout the history of Changeling, the Dreaming, there hasn't really been a whole lot done with them. So I thought that I wanted to represent them a little bit and kind of show them in a light that's a lot broader than, or at least in my mind, some of the narrow stereotypes the Nunnahi can kind of fall into sometimes. And I don't think it's intentional on anyone's part that they kind of end up into some narrow stereotypes. I wanted to broaden a little bit about how they were presented. And so I started doing some research and kind of looking into a little bit more in depth into some of the horrible stuff that I do happen around Native Americans, even up through most of the 20th century. And that kind of got some of the wheels turning. And I looked into the American Indian Center and kind of what it was doing. It dovetailed very strongly into kind of what I wanted to do with the Nunnahi and them surviving these impossible odds. So I think in my draft, it talks very, very briefly about some of that horribleness about Native American families being broken up and basically being forced to live in cities and off the reservation. And it was basically a systematic effort to destroy Native American culture. But the people in Chicago got together and said, no, we're not going to let you destroy our culture. Since one of the ways that the Nunnehi can gain glamour, even though they can't gain glamour from a traditional freehold, they do gain glamour from doing their tribal rites. Here is the center that preserves those tribal rites. And so they can actually use that as a way to survive and even thrive in the face of this basically overwhelming opposition.
Reframing how the Nunnehi are viewed is also kind of why I included Samoset. I don't know if you caught it, but in the Pocket Gardens Glade, it is protected by I'm going to butcher this word, a Tungat, who is a social theorist professor at MIT. He is partnered with I think I put it the unlikely duo of an Autumn She, Baroness Raphaela, and Tungat, and they protect these little tiny glades from being developed. Because we have this image from 20 years of the Nunnehi being, the native Fae, they're people too, and they live in the same world. They should have the same jobs. They should have dovetailing goals. Well, not have. They're just as valid as any other kind of changeling. And we wanted to show that too, as best we could.
I've seen a lot of conversation online about the American Indian Center and it being called a freehold, and Nunnehi freeholds being invoked as lodges in C20. You brought up the fact that in some previous texts, the Nunnehi aren't able to harvest glamour from, we'll say, Western freeholds. And that is mentioned in the book as well. A lot of people that find that confusing. Did you talk at all about the Nunnehi freeholds are called lodges lines when talking about framing this, and how do you envision all of that, just for the people who've been struggling with it?
It's not something that I was really consciously thinking about when I was doing it, because in my mind, the base definition of a freehold is a sanctuary from banality.
Yeah, it's kind of where I was too with it. Even redlining it, it never occurred to me to... Because, there's no hard stats on it. It wasn't statted for a reason. And that reason was, it should be whatever players need it to be, however they want to envision it.
One of the things I noticed reading the book, and this might be just an artifact of having multiple writers working on the same project, was that there didn't seem to be a single cohesive line about how the Nunnehi interact with this element of Fae society. And based on the way Changeling in the past has interacted with the Galane and the artifacts of non-white cultures, I think is the best way to put it.
Yes.
That in prepping for this, I kind of identified that I might have Galane PTSD and that I am easily triggered by things that are ambiguous but possibly negative. I noticed that there are conflicting messages about the Nunnehi, some of which are ambiguous, like the Nunnehi are incompatible with Western freeholds, and others which maybe were not intended to be an outright prescription against the Nunnehi using freeholds, but there was one in particular in the section about destroying freeholds that said the glamour of a freehold is incompatible with the Nunnehi. Then there were the examples of Nunnehi freeholds in the book. Like I said, I might have Galane PTSD and I'm being a little bit too sensitive to these things, but...
No, these are good things to raise, they are.
Oh.
Quite frankly, I am the wrong person to be asking about what's a hardline rule, because I don't like hardline rules. I think I basically I don't like carving things in stone. So are the Nunnehi meant to not be compatible with Western freeholds? I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Some of the stuff, at least some of my struggles with writing and dealing with the various Galane, is that there are artifacts from stuff that was written very early on in the game line that I don't think is the way we would do it now.
We are kind of stuck with this as an anniversary edition. Yeah. It's not a revision.
Even though it is touted as kind of the third edition of Changeling, and an anniversary edition at the same time, there are some things that we just
there were places where we could push, and there are
Yeah.
places where we can't.
yeah, and unfortunately,
And
there are some stuff that I'm honestly fairly uncomfortable with the way the Nunnehy have been treated over the years in Changeling. That I kind of wish we could take a different approach with it, but
And this is not to say anything against the writer who covered it either. I'm not even sure who did at this point anymore. But like there were, like I said, there were places where we can make major changes. Dauntain being one of them. Writing Dark Ages Fae as part of Changeling history was another, but not everybody felt like they could do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm very, very familiar with imposed constraints. And honestly, like, just having heard you guys talk up to this point, like, I was pretty sure I already knew what the answer was there. It's just nice to get it out there.
It's not really like it's not like it's a super deliberate thing. It's just, like I said, it's not a revision. It's not a new edition. It was presented in its original outline as a love letter to the fans.
Yeah.
There were places where we could push. There were places we couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And those places where we couldn't came from, I don't know how far up the line, but way above our pay grade.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're reading this, you must be in dire need of a change. The same thing happened to me long ago. I'd lost sight of what mattered most in life, real connections with other people and nature. So I dropped everything and moved to the place that I truly belong. I've enclosed the deed to that place, my pride and joy. It's located in Stardew Valley on the southern coast. It's the perfect place to start your new life. This was my most precious gift of all, and now it's yours. I know you'll honor the family name, kiddo. Good luck. Love, Grandpa.
I was curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the new things that you did with Glades. You mentioned very briefly the MIT gardens. Where did that idea come from? How do you see that working, all these like mini glades in a story?
Well, I mean, if you look at gardens in particular, they're an archetype of glade that show up in urban areas. It's kind of low-key saying that the dreaming can bounce back. It can find like Jurassic Park, life finds a way. It's kind of showing like one of the things that I've been on, like I said, since the beginning of C20. And one of the things that I came into it as a writer with, and that I, took up to the next level as a developer with, is not all of these things are bad or banal. Science and math don't have to be banal. Doing repetitive things, if you really enjoy them, don't have to be banal. Banality was too narrowly defined. And to say that the dreaming can't come into urban areas because urban areas are full of, nightmares and boring people and autumn persons. No, bullshit. I call bullshit on that. You look at MIT, man. Look at MIT. Look at this. They have the Center for Brains, Minds, and Machines. How is that not glamorous? MIT has had this. I've never been there, by the way. They spread knowledge. They have these, they have made it a point in their yearly budget to put aside money so that their students have green spaces. How is that not glamorous? So gardens especially, like, they're really recent. They're like since the Resurgence recent. And it's kind of like the dreaming saying, hey, fuck you, move over, I'm coming back.
Yeah. And like urban gardening right now is such a huge thing.
Yeah,
We'll have
exactly.
the big community gardens. My sister is a
co-ops, yeah.
And she's huge into these, and they're just amazing. I didn't even know about it until a few years ago. And you get these whole entire communities coming together and planting these communal gardens. And
You have empty lots being like the houses burned down or got torn down, and the community will get together and make a co-op.
Yeah,
That's a garden, man. Or well, technically it's a homestead, but
and if there's not glamour in that, then I don't know.
That makes me think about something that I knew I wanted to work in somewhere. I didn't know the best spot. I was involved with a couple kind of live-in art co-ops in Chicago. The one I was most involved with is called Eco, and they have like a 4-story building, and a bunch of people live there together, and they ran a CSA for a while, and they do festivals and cooking workshops and yoga, and
a CSA is a farm share for anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, CSA is a farm share. And they do a bunch of like independent creative business incubators. And the thing that always struck me about it, like they had this annual thing called Feastival. And there are a bunch of people giving academic talks, and then they get a bunch of people together to collectively cook all of the food. And they turn cooking the food for the festival into like 15 little mini cooking workshops leading up to the actual event, and then there's fire spinning and all this other stuff.
But that's a freehold to me.
Oh no, it's absolutely a freehold. The thing that struck me about it that like I want to tap somehow, and there's like a system there, is the thing that I love about the way C20 dealt with Bedlam, even before the Bedlam rules and freeholds, is you go into Bedlam, and the reason freeholds are dangerous, just if you're just looking at the C20 book, is you're gonna slip eventually. And you need human connection to stop from slipping. You need these epiphanies. If you just cling to your freehold, well, the nightmare is going to overtake you eventually. I'm thinking about this idea of this space where there are so many dreamers in the freehold itself, it can anchor that effect somehow. I know this is probably well beyond the book, but I was curious what you thought about those sorts of spaces where, like, maybe it's a freehold,
absolutely,
but dreamers outnumber changelings there.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure, yeah. That sounds
I think a smart changeling would move right in.
Yeah, I've got one of my recurring settings that I use in a lot of in a couple of chronicles that I've run so far. The changeling district of the city is this big maker community where they've basically these makers have taken over like this entire city block. So the changelings have seen this going on. They're like, hey, we need in on this. This is awesome.
I have much the same thing. Like I use my own city when I run Changeling. And it's literally the oldest city in North America. And we have like 500 years of history here. There are art, like it's not really so much as an art district, but the Crafts Council especially is huge here, like handmade goods, very tourist trappy sometimes. But, you know, but there's out in, it's called Kitty Bitty Village. It's just out, not really outside the city, but it's like its own community. And that's where the microbrewery is. That's where the Plantation, which is an artist workshop space. Like it's a shared space for artists. That's where that is. And any changeling who had any sense of survival would move right next door.
Yeah.
In Minneapolis, at least, the microbrew thing has become a bit banal, in fact.
Oh, no.
Well, but there's the difference. Like, you can have two things that are technically the same thing, but one is become incredibly banal, and the other can still generate glamour.
They have a point.
Yeah, that's my neighborhood right now. Like, not with the microbrewery aspect, but the housing dynamics and the things they're building that they're selling is very creative, but not and for that purpose. So,
so that would not be your artist district right there. That would be your autumn person district.
Yeah,
that would be like changelings get the hell out of it.
And there was actually a little like a single line, I think, that sort of touched on that in the Freeholds book. I was using an example of just a noble's freehold, and I decided, you know, hey, let's take a look at the toy box. Where is the toy box now? That was the original first edition signature freehold. And it's like, oh, that's in San Francisco. What's happened in San Francisco since...
Oh, crap, what's happened in San Francisco?
Yeah. So it's like one line, maybe two, but it's like... The toy box is struggling now because of all these Silicon Valley people who moved in, and there's just no
And it's not the Silicon Valley people, because there
Sure.
will be creative places
There will
in.
be, yeah, but the money is overwhelming so much else, and the rents are skyrocketing, and
It's the shallow and pointless
Uh-huh.
lifestyle.
yep.
Not to say that anybody who lives in San Francisco is shallow and pointless.
Oh,
Just
no,
let me
no,
say that right now.
I have several friends in San Francisco, and they complain about these exact things.
Yeah.
Really not off the mark. By
The variety of ways to interpret the same thing touches on a point I wanted to get to. So one of the things I noticed in the examples was that they were a lot less constrained by what I'm going to call the system descriptions of things, and that as well, I might have killed that, was an example of a balefire that wasn't literally a fire. And then we also touched on gardens, which kind of defy the Glen requirement of being untouched. And I like the space that creates, but it being in conflict with the description in the system setting is a little bit hard to square for somebody who's as rules lawyer as I am.
Like I said, I don't like hard rules.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the
I
team
don't like
that-
hard rules. Yeah,
team
you're
that
talking to the wrong people, man.
Well, then the question that emerges from that kind of organically is, why not make squishy rules?
We did.
The,
We made them.
the
We
Glade
made
rules
them
specifically
specifically,
say that they need to be untouched.
and technically, a garden is
It is
untouched.
very cultivated.
It depends.
but it's not worked like a freehold is worked.
You know, it's not like that. But that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of room for interpretation in the word untouched. It could just mean natural. You can have manicured nature. You know, like, and that's kind of the point of why the coalition of changelings who go to MIT, who live in the area, who work there, are trying to keep it so that they remain untouched. Like, you can caretake something without ruining it, without changing it. And that's kind of the point that's really the point that we're trying to hammer home there, is you can take care of something without fundamentally changing its nature.
So, as a counterexample, because I'm an argumentative person, but as a counterexample, would Central Park, were it not already a cairn, count as a garden?
Parts of it, probably.
I was going to
Central
say,
It's
Park
way
is
too
entirely
big.
artificial.
yeah, I'm not a
Central
fan
Park
of
used to be
crossover, but-
city.
Was it created recently? Like, this is the thing. This is where the soft rules are. This is where all the, like, there are, quote, hard rules there, but they're not really that hard because there are always ways around them. Central Park has been there for, what, 2 centuries? I'd say
Well-
that parts of it are quite natural by now.
Well, and with Central Park, I think that's a prime example of the intentionally breaking down something that had been structured back to a glade.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I
That
think
could very well be
that's-
as well.
I think that's probably the story that I would go with there. I'm kind of halfway between both ends on this conversation because on one hand, I get really caught up in framing. I mostly get caught up in framing because I'm going to have players that I'm going to have to explain things to. And
Yeah.
depending on those players, they may cling on to words. On the other hand, I'm very inclined to just throw wide swaths of the game out the window. I'm much
Everybody
more
does that.
Yeah, I'm
Golden
much more
rule.
comfortable doing that than a lot of people that I've gamed with recently, actually. I think part of what I'm hearing, and it actually does make a fair bit of the book make sense to me, although I can hear a lot of fans screaming, is that the book is pretty intentionally contradictory on some of these points.
Yeah.
To get a, I mean,
Again, you're
almost
not
kind of-
really.
Like-
I was going to say, I don't know if it's intentionally contradictory, but if you see the contradiction, think of it as a way to expand
Okay,
things.
no, like, I can't really speak for most of the writing because like, Steffi and Charlie basically had half and half, you know? For contradictory things, well, honey, that's my wheelhouse. That's where I thrive. I took, you know, I made banal chimera a thing. Like, I know that they existed before, but I put them in the core book.
I'm
I took
very
changelings that should not have been reborn and made them get reborn. Contradictory is my wheelhouse.
I think And you can totally do the, you may well think that I couldn't possibly comment. I can't help but look into some of this and see, like, what you were talking about and how far you could push. You know, you can't reset the boundaries, but it would be unreasonable to say any World of Darkness property kept to its own boundaries that carefully. So
again, I come from, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like, again, my game back in the day was Mage. I played a cultist. You know what the cult does? The cult sees a boundary and goes, okay, I'm passing you today.
But yeah, from my perspective, I'm very much does that make a cool story? Yeah, let's run with it. That's awesome. My first Chronicle was a crossover thing, but I'm actually not that big of a fan of crossovers these days. And I kind of feel like each of the World of Darkness games should be the star of their own game. So
Charlie, you're slipping back to Grump, man.
As someone who does a lot of crossover,
get off my lawn.
I like, you know, if I'm talking about something in Changeling and I know that it's been referenced in another game, then, you know, I might pay some lip service to the other thing. But at the same time, this is the Changeling perspective on it. And
get off my lawn.
Yeah, but at the same time, how addictive would epiphanying a mage be? Meditate on that for a moment.
Depends on the mage. I doubt you'd get much out of a technocrat.
Well, I think a knocker might. Speaking of mage phases.
It depends. It depends. Are they going to get more out of the New World Order or out of IdX?
Well, I mean, sure, IdX, but I think a Boggin could get plenty out of a Syndicate member, though. Or not a Boggin, a Bogart.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
That brings us to, you know, when we were talking about not loving hard rules. There's a hard rule that we've wanted to ask a question about because it was a little confusing.
Absolutely.
There was no, this is more just like a weird thing that we didn't understand, so we wanted to see if we missed something. It's going back to the whole Bedlam, I think it was a sidebar, and talking about overcharging. Like if you get glamour higher than your rating, and we couldn't find any reference to that being allowed. Can you talk a little bit about the intent of that?
The intent was, hey, that's kind of cool. Let's do that.
The intent was, yeah, Charlie, that really does sound like a good idea. Let's go with it. Like, I'm sorry to break it down. Like, if you think that this is like a very mystical process of writing, it's not. It's mostly like conversations on Messenger where it's like, what about if I did this? Oh, yeah, shit, go with that. Like,
yeah. But no, the idea is, you know, if you gain more glamour than you can actually hold, and you just sort of OD'd on glamour is kind of the idea. And that's bad. Don't OD on glamour.
Stay away from Dross, kids.
But I love crushing it and snorting it.
Well, that would be one way to go into Bedlam, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I've got a very nice Thelaine character that his ears perk up right there.
What do you see? Rictus asked him. A wall, Harvey replied, though the more he stared at it, the less certain of this he was. The stones, which had seemed solid enough at first sight, now looked to be shifting and wavering, as though they'd been chiseled from the fog itself and piled up here to keep out prying eyes. It looks like a wall, Harvey said, but it's not a wall. You're very observant, Rictus replied admiringly. Most people just see a dead end, so they turn around and take another street. But not us. No, not us. We are going to keep on walking. You know why? Because the holiday house is on the other side? What a miraculous kid you are, Rictus replied. That's exactly right. Are you hungry, by the way? Starving. Well, there's a woman waiting for you in the house called Mrs. Griffin, and let let me tell you, she is the greatest cook in all of America land. I swear, on my tailor's grave, anything you can dream of eating, she can cook. All you have to do is ask her deviled eggs. He smacked his lips. Oh, perfection. I don't see a gate, Harvey said. That's because there isn't one. So how do we get in? Just keep walking. Half out of hunger, half out of curiosity, Harvey did as Rictus had instructed, and as he came within 3 steps of the wall, a gust of balmy, flower-scented wind slipped between the shimmering stones and kissed his cheek. Its warmth was welcome after his long, cold trek, and he picked up his pace, reaching out to touch the wall as he approached it. The misty stones seemed to reach for him in their turn, wrapping their soft gray arms around his shoulders and ushering him through the wall.
Now that I'm done being unfortunately aggressive fanboy, I'm going to move on to an easier one again. Okay.
Oh, I swear to God, that's going to be my next archetype as a character. Unfortunately, aggressive fanboy.
Oh my god!
I mean, autumn person right there, right?
Right, yeah, like, I need this to be an autumn person in a book
Listen.
somewhere.
Do you know why the theater critic was how he was?
I grew up in the theater, so, oh yes, I've met that person.
I date theater people.
Theater people are the best and the worst simultaneously.
What is one thing you wish you'd been able to fit in the book that you couldn't?
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
I actually, that is a good question, because I honestly was surprised, at least for my sections, that I was able to fit in as much as I did, given the short word counts involved.
See, this kind of segues into the other thing that we can talk about, too, because what didn't get into this book is kind of going into the next.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about freeholds for a while. If you want to talk about the next book.
I am not the only developer on it. Pete Woodworth, who developed the upcoming Boggin Kiss book, we're co-devs on it. So I don't want to get too in-depth. But no, absolutely, we can talk a little bit about it.
What we have officially is Changeling 20th Player's Guide, which is interesting because I don't think any of the other 20ths have Player's Guide. They have companions. They have books with secrets in them that when you read them, you go, oh, this is a Player's Guide. But, like, just, like, owning it, that's new. Can you just tell, like, 20,000 feet what the plan is?
The plan is to spend not that much time talking about Concordia.
Yeah.
Oh, thank Jesus.
I love you so much right now.
Now, what I wish we could have gotten more word count for in Book of Freeholds is something that Charlie pissed me off with because I wanted him to write like 10,000 more words on it. Parliament of Dreams. He put in this line that every freeholder gets a seat in the House of Commons.
Which was different than the original write-up of the Parliament of Dreams back in Nobles the Shining Host, but I was writing it and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if...
Charlie, stop doing this to me!
I both love that, and that would completely destroy my current game.
Yeah, and on the flip side, like, I had to go back to that book and be like, oh, that's not the way it works. That's been my headcanon for like a decade.
Yeah.
No, I mean
Exactly.
that matches feudal systems better. It's way more interesting. I love the stories that emerge from that about like, yeah, I'm a freeholder. I have a freehold. I want nothing to do with your parliament.
Yeah.
Thanks. Which that's why it would break my game. My players explicitly went, "Oh, courts, no."
But you can do that. But you can do that. You can just like okay, the Wizengamot from Harry Potter. You know how many people show up to their fucking seats?
Yep.
But then you also have the people who are like, we want this vote, so you want to show up? We'll bribe you to show up for this one particular vote. And,
it adds an optional layer. Like, that was the whole point of Freeholds, for me anyway, coming at it as the developer, was to enhance the layers of play. Like, you can have political games, like, not that you couldn't before, but it's enhancing political games, it's enhancing economical games, like even just quests and social games, places where you could go. One thing I am glad we got in the book, though, was the Covenants of Flame. I told Charlie, I was like, okay, I wrote, because I did the Freehold section in C20. I was like, okay, Charlie, I totally did this sidebar about the Return of the Kings, and literally phrased it that way because it was kind of... Some of us liked seeing how many pop culture references we could slip past red lines. And I was definitely one of them. Long story short, we're going to be touching on the Parliament of Dreams.
That's exciting. That's going to be interesting. It's really only gotten maybe a paragraph here or there.
Yeah, because when I was researching for that section, the only things I could find were a line in the various core books, the couple of paragraphs.
Kingdom of Willows too, I think, had the most, and it really didn't have that much.
Yeah, and it was mostly, if I recall correctly, it was mostly just a description of the building. It wasn't even,
It was about David mostly too.
Yeah,
it was about David Ardry. So yeah, long story short, I wish we could have gotten more about Parliament, but that kind of went into the next book. So, but I am glad that we did get the Covenants in, because Charlie is like, I will bring him with me to every book I develop now. I loved working with him on C20. I'm really glad I picked him up for Freeholds. I had his name on my short list for when Player's Guide came up.
Yeah, I liked the Covenants as a throwback to the Exalted. They kind of exist there too, and they're creepy as fucking.
I basically told him, I gave you so much latitude on that. I was like, all right, I just said that they came back from Arcadia with these artifacts that were lost, and just do it. And he came back with the Covenants of Flame, man, and man, they're beautiful. Just a beautiful, small but vital mechanic. That then tied into Steffi's repetition of while they reside within.
Which, speaking of Arcadia, not necessarily a question, but I just have to say, thank you for name dropping Tir na Nog.
Yes.
I really appreciated seeing that in the book. I only recently learned that the Arcadia name, that's a callback to Ars Magica that turned into World of Darkness. I didn't realize it went back that far. But it's always confused me a little bit, and having even just the hook to Tir na Nog made me very happy.
I'm pretty Irish in my heritage, very, very Irish. Tir na Nog is the land of fairies. Of course, Charlie name dropped it, but of course I was going to let him name drop it.
Well, I actually was always a little bit frustrated in the second edition core book, where it explicitly says North America was Tir na Nog, and no. Yeah, so we got to retcon that a little bit, and so I was glad to be able to retcon that just a little bit. So,
I mean, Tir na Nog and Tir Tarangary were supposed to be islands off of fucking Ireland. North America, while technically an island off Ireland, is not quite
a big island.
Way off.
Yeah, it's not quite what we wanted to do.
I beg to announce to your glorious highness, began the Scarecrow in a solemn voice, that my Emerald City has been overrun by a crowd of impudent girls with knitting needles who have enslaved all the men, robbed the streets and public buildings of all their emerald jewels, and usurped my throne. I know it, said Glinda. They also threatened to destroy me, as well as all the good friends and allies you see before you, continued the Scarecrow. And had we not managed to escape their clutches, our days would long since have ended. I know it, repeated Glinda. Therefore, I have come to beg your assistance, resumed the Scarecrow, for I believe you are always glad to succor the unfortunate and oppressed. That is true, replied the sorceress slowly. But the Emerald City is now ruled by General Ginger, who has caused herself to be proclaimed queen. What right have I to oppose her? Why, she stole the throne from me, said the Scarecrow. And how came you to possess the throne? Asked Glinda. I got it from the Wizard of Oz, and by the choice of the people, returned the Scarecrow, uneasy at such questioning. And where did the wizard get it? She continued gravely. I'm told he took it from Pastoria, the former king, said the Scarecrow, becoming confused under the intent look of the sorceress. Then, declared Glinda, the throne of the Emerald City belongs neither to you nor to Ginger, but to this Pastoria, from whom the wizard usurped it. So just to ask maybe a little bit more about the player's guide, we talked about like that one thing. You mentioned that maybe not talking about Concordia a ton. Should we keep that at the 10,000 foot level? Can you give a little bit
I
more
can talk
definition
about
to
that.
Awesome.
I can talk about that. I think a third of the book's word count is going to the places that we haven't seen yet. Australia, the Middle East, South America, and Africa.
I have to say that makes me really, really happy. I have a dream that I will never again read one kith is covering 3
No, I mean, like, we don't...
lands.
With the caveat that we don't have the word count. I mean, each place rightly deserves its own book. But we have to go with what we have. Like, there won't be enough word count to do everything. You know, one of the things, I'm going to be very specific about this. We're not saying that the stuff that will be coming out in the player's guide is it. We are not saying that, like, if we end up doing, like, 2 new kits for each area, we're not saying that there are only 2 kits in each area. We're just saying, like, this is a jumping off point. We're trying to give some representation to places that aren't Eurocentric.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that approach, the expansive framing as opposed to the specific framing, I always like the World of Darkness books that go that route, especially now that there's Create-A-Kith, you know, explicitly framing something as like, okay, here is a starter. Yep. Now go forth. I'm okay with that, especially in the context of a player's guide. That is still pretty exciting for me.
I will say that all of our writers are very intent on doing an appropriate job. Not just a good job, but they want to be respectful as well. And people are burying themselves in the research for this.
That is definitely very exciting to hear. I have one more quick question. Not so much player's guide. It kind of actually draws us back to Freeholds a little bit. You introduced a thing in C20, and I feel like it's connected to Freeholds. And I wanted to do a little bit of conversation at the end on Dross economy. I know we chatted about that. It was probably like a year ago now. Can you talk a little bit about Dross economy, especially how you feel about it now that there are special powers for your freeholds that really explicitly create Dross?
Well, I was always kind of irritated that, not really irritated. Every single one of us who's worked on Changeling is exactly the kind of fanboy and fangirl that you guys are. I remember working on C20, most of us went from Grump back into Wilder. We approached it like we're all in our 30s now. We have families and responsibilities. We're so fucking broken. But look, Changeling, I feel like I'm 20 again. One of the things that I really appreciated in particular was the chance to shore up the areas that kind of had holes in them. And for Changelings to not have an economy, it's always bothered me. Same thing as they didn't have rules for crafting a freehold. They didn't have a crafting system.
Building treasures, building oaths.
Yes.
That was always one of the things that annoyed me about Changeling, is you had these lists of oaths, but there was never guidelines. How do you create a new oath?
Why would you create a new oath?
Why would you create a new oath? That sort of thing.
Charlie, by the way, he wrote the oaths for Freeholds. He's really got a knack for it.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, those have been always some of my pet peeves. Is that Changeling historically has always given lists of things but not how to create your own.
And again, another place I drew from Mage, like mages and changelings are actually really similar mechanically in that they are completely different things, but the gist is the same, They have, like, where mages have nodes, changelings have balefires. They both produce the energy source, but why do mages get tasks and changelings get nothing? Mages, and I did see it argued on the forums that wretched hives of scum and villainy. No, really, love you all. According to the forum, this one argument on the forums, it's really banal to base a monetary society on glamour for some reason. But the thing is, I don't get it, but okay.
Their life energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, it makes perfect
but
sense.
Mages,
to base the economy
mages
off of
something that has value. Dross has value. It is a point of glamour. It is an easy value to attribute. No matter what it looks like, one piece of dross is 1 point of glamour. Just the same as no matter what it looks like, one piece of task is 1 point of quintessence.
Yeah, and there were lines in old 2nd edition books about dross taxes. Like, obviously, this thing was an unfinished thought, but it was there.
Yeah.
And I just kind of because everybody always assumed, like dross was meant to be a point of glamour because the word dross means leftovers. You can make dross. I will clarify right now. No, you do not constantly have to be killing chimera in the dreaming to get dross. Okay? Dross can occur naturally, and you can harvest it like you would harvest silver out of a mine and mint it.
There was a really, really fun game I never got to run that I wanted to do where, like, this hive of knockers goes into some kid's dreaming mind with a neuromancy to, like, get the thing they need to make the thing for the She-Lord, and then, like...
That is a perfectly legitimate way.
And then fast forward 5 years, and this kid is a nervous wreck because his mind has been mined.
They took the thing out of him. Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
That is a perfectly good way to harvest dross. Now, it's not so great for the dreamer.
No, but the Fae don't give a shit about morality.
I mean, Charlie wouldn't know anything about that.
No.
I played in Victor's Changeling game at GenCon last year. So.
And he did a magically horrible thing to a couple cops. Well, one cop in particular. Oh, that poor man.
Magically delicious.
Thinking about the whole like freeholds and economy thing, I kind of totally want to do a thing where there's an economy of dross, but it's dangerous. Because, okay, there's the dross you get from humans. That's lovely, and that's human dross. But now that you've reintroduced that freehold glamour induces banality, just like the horror of, here's a ton of dross, I'll pay you for this thing. It all came from a freehold, and I'm going to sit back and watch because you don't know
you could do that. You could do that.
Like, that adds a whole different, like, thing the Dantean, thing the Thalane.
Okay, if you look at typhoids, they produce dross.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very nice dross, but it is dross.
Yeah, and talking about all that, like, mage being your jam thing, I love the idea that, like, not all dross is usable by all changelings, and some of it might be actually
it's really
banal.
Not. Look, okay, this is just a name that I kick around behind the scenes. The Dantean were specifically Nefandi. Not Nefandi, Nefandi. They are exactly what the Nefandi are. They're broken. They're violent in some way, shape, or form, and they want to destroy the thing that makes them. And that's exactly it. Like, there's tasks that mages won't touch. There's dross that changelings shouldn't touch. I don't know, like, I don't really bring one game into another, but there's a lot of parallels and a lot of themes that are quite freely interchangeable.
Yeah, well, and if there are two games that I just love mixing, it's Mage and Changeling.
Yeah.
All day long.
It makes sense. Like I said, like, they're very spiritually like each other. They're spiritual twins, you might even say.
How about those Thalane freeholds?
Well, if
All
you-
yours, Charlie.
I kind of love the Thalane. The storyteller in me loves the Thalane. The player in me does not, but the storyteller in me does. And if
The writer in me loves them too.
yeah, if we ever get to revisit Thalane in more depth, Maggie.
Honey, you don't even have to. I told Charlie after he turned me in his drafts for freeholds, I'm like, Charlie, you're a fucking horror writer now. That's it. I told him, like, I believe the line was when it was talking about maintaining a freehold, because we wanted to touch on all the mechanical, well, not really the mechanical stuff, but all like the minutia without going too into detail about what owning a freehold entails. And I was like, maybe they have, chimerical pests. And he comes back with fucking dream weevils and nightmare locusts. And I'm just like,
I did really like those.
And I'm just like, I am a horror writer. And I approach most of my work as a horror writer, clearly. But I read those. I'm like, Charlie, I was like, I'm going to tell you right now, you are a horror writer. Don't ever deny it. You are not allowed to say you're not. Because this shit is horrifying. And all I said was, I don't know, chimerical pests. One thing that eats your freehold, one thing that eats your fucking dreamers.
Yep.
Well, and so, I mean, also thinking about Thalane freeholds, I think I mentioned it in one of the fiction pieces from our Beyond the Mist episode. I really feel like there are a lot of stories waiting in the wings about, okay, there are all these Concordian politics, but like, no, really, the Thalane are taking freeholds now, and we have to deal with that.
That's something that I kind of have been thinking about for a little bit now. Pretty much ever since we worked on C20, I've got like a lot of things in my head that I want to play with the Thalane. So.
Yeah.
Oh, I keep hoping that we're gonna get a Book of Nightmares because my God, I would love to do that.
I want to do a Book of Nightmares.
Coming up with Ruin was fun enough. How I described it to people, it starts at infusing the properties of cold iron and just kind of goes up from there.
Yeah.
But like to do more arts, and I would honestly let Charlie just go fucking crazy with Chimera. I really would.
Well, there was one thing that it was seeded. It was said to exist in C20, and I've played around with a house version of it, and that's versions of the stigmas that are wielded by Chimera. I think specifically in the Dark Iron Chimera. Like, I love the new Dantean. I love them, but I also love banal changelings deeply for very specific character archetype reasons that came up in our queer themes episode a fair bit. I'm really curious to see how that would really play out, because I think that opens a lot of things even beyond Cold Iron Chimera.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like I love antagonists. I love writing antagonists. I love the work I did. I mean, like, that shit's going up on my wall in frames, Like, I think Ghasts were the favorite I came up with of Thalane. The Redcaps. I based them on the gentleman from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They take organs, they eat them. Man, I just want to dive into the gigantic world of nightmares.
One thing I'm running into with my game is I want to move to using the new freehold rules, but my players have a bunch of holding, but they took it in C20. They just took the background points. They get some glamour. We move on. And I wanted to dive into using the freehold rules, and I saw the whole thing about investing glamour, the investment. And at first I thought, okay, well, I won't inflict that on them. Then I got into the rules, and I'm like, no, I really have to. They get too much advantage here. Do you have any advice for transitioning when you've already kind of you didn't build your characters with the glamour pool to support that? You have these background points. You want to use these rules.
Well, you have the background.
Balance gets a little weird.
So the background kind of assumes that you've already spent that glamour. So the glamour on their character sheet could just be their glamour after they've invested it in their freehold. So.
Oh, okay. So that's actually something I wasn't totally clear on. They seemed to be at the start of a game, and so I was thinking that was something you had to spend beyond the background points.
Yeah, if you're building a freehold, like in the middle of a chronicle or something, then yeah, spend the glamour, invest it, get your soul as part of it. But if at character creation you took those dots in holding, then you totally spent that point of glamour before the game started. So
we didn't want to make it completely inaccessible, which is why like a character can in fact create a level 5 freehold without, permanently undoing themselves. We also didn't want to make it simple because as one of the current, de facto line developers, I did kind of want to point out that the dreaming is and can bounce back. It's also very fragile. It's not a sure thing. It's not solid. So these places are vanishing still. It's bouncing back in one area, but it's vanishing in another. Creating powerful freeholds especially is going to be difficult. Just this side of impossible. Not quite impossible, but close to it. The reason why we kept it as you always have to invest 1 dot is to reflect that exact thing, that it's a point of personal sacrifice. And you really have to want to build a freehold to build a freehold. But that's specifically for in-game building. Like Charlie said, if you take it before, like if you just take it as a holding, it's considered that you've already spent it.
Man, those background points pack a punch. I mean, on the flip side, the permanent dot banality if the freehold ever falls is also a punch to the gut. So I also recognize kind of some of the vulnerability that comes with that. But
here's the fun part. If you have a group because I don't think we actually did this in particular, but if you have a group that owns a freehold jointly, who carries the treasure? Because there's only one covenant to 1 freehold. So if you have a group of 5, who gets to reside within?
Well, and that also brings up an interesting question about the seed on the Parliament of Dreams with, a group situation. I kind of like that being undefined. I like that just kind of hanging there. So, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's not really our job to tie up everything into a nice, neat bow. Sometimes we let things dangle because who the hell are we to tell you how to play your game?
Some things work a lot better undefined than they do if they're defined for
absolutely
gaming course book. So
I know Charlie wanted to talk about one thing he's doing in the new core or in the new book.
So yeah, I'm writing playable Chimera and Chimera as PCs.
That's interesting. I have to ask, how much are you looking or not looking, and maybe you can say you don't want to give too much away, at sprites from Dark Ages Fae? Because that immediately makes me think about sprites.
I was actually just reading Dark Ages Fae yesterday. Now, how much we'll get used from that, I don't know, but
the reason we think that the time is right for them now is because, you look at movies like Night at the Museum or Ted or any movie that has something coming to life. And that's all I'm going to say about it. That's where the inspiration is coming from.
So, the thing that makes me think about, though, is the Warpeltinger.
Yeah.
And specifically, I suspect this episode is going to drop before the episode I'm about to reference. I'm sorry, everyone. We don't do these in order. But, we were talking in an episode about Dark Ages Fae about that Warpeltinger story and how it relates to sprite seining and the potential connection there. And I can't help but think about that hook and how it relates to the idea of playable Chimera. So I guess just throwing out there that I definitely see connections there, although I see what you're saying as well about the thing while it is in the state of being Chimera.
Yep. But yeah, no, the Wolpertinger, I kind of left it ambiguous in C20 how the transition happened. But yeah, I kind of had stuff like the Seining from Dark Ages Fae in my mind, and just that they needed to do something to achieve that level of permanence within the dreaming in order to make that transition from Chimera to Cathane. It's
interesting because, sorry, I didn't mean just to jump in, because I referenced Wolpertingers too. As a Chimera. And there was like no collusion really between there.
Uh-huh.
But it just goes to show, like, yes, there are still some Wolpertingers that are Chimera.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the transition isn't complete. Like, he, like he said, like he left it very vague.
Yeah, left it very vague, and that, like I said, that was intentional because it needed to be. I've seen some folks on the forums say, like, if a chimera takes over a human body, that means that they're now a Cathay. And I'm like, no, there's so much more metaphysical.
That isn't how that works. No.
Well, and I mean, the way I looked at it and thinking about it as being related to seining that knowledge of how to seine a sprite, and I think of sprites and chimeras being very similar. Like, that knowledge was lost. And it just the right burst of remembrance, nightmare, questing into the dreaming, whatever. It's not like totally unretrievable, but it's never going to become a knowledge again.
No, nothing's totally unretrievable. I mean, the Corad exists to ensure that nothing's ever truly forgotten.
Morgan whispered, "It is beautiful," and Vivian could hear the awe in her voice. "Lady, is it real?" "It is more real than any other place you have seen," Vivian told her, "and soon you will know it." The barge moved toward the shore and scraped heavily on the sandy edge. The silent oarsman moored it with a rope and assisted the lady to step on shore. They then led the horses to land, and Morgan was left to step to the shore by herself. She was never to forget the first sight of Avalon in the sunset. Green lawns sloped down to the edge of the reeds along the lake, and swans glided silent as the barge over the waters. Beneath the groves of oak and apple trees rose a low building of gray stone, and Morgan could see white-robed forms pacing slowly along the colonnaded walk. From somewhere, very softly, she could hear the sound of a harp. The low, slanting light, could it be the same sun she knew, flooded the land with gold and silence, and she felt her throat tighten with tears. She thought, without knowing why, "I am coming home," even though all the years of her life had been spent at Tintagel and Caerleon, and she had never been this far into the fair country before.
All right, that was Walking Away from Arcadia with Maggie and Charlie, the dev and one of the writers. Well, two of the writers, I suppose.
Two of the writers. I keep my hand in.
Two of the writers for the Book of Freeholds, which is a real thing now. I want to thank you both for coming on and putting up with us trying to force this into a bit of a shape.
It's a perfect parable for Changeling.
It's true.
Force it into a bit of a shape is basically how they function.
Yes, thank you both for coming on, and I want to thank Victor for co-hosting this with me, and we'll catch you with our next episode.
The readings from this conversation were Mirror Lights from Book of Freeholds by Onyx Path Publishing, Letter from Stardew Valley by Eric Barone, The Marvelous Land of Oz by Frank L. Baum, Thief of Always by Clive Barker, and The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. The music from this episode was Wabi Sabi Nightclub by Hypnodrones, Spooky Disco by Lobo Loco, Hope by Borrtex, Throwing a Tantrum by Ask Again, Camille Saint-Saëns Danse Macabre, Isolated Harp by Kevin MacLeod, and LSD by Mom Plaisir.